All right, let's get started. So my name is Bojhan Somers, and today I want to give you kind of a overview what the Drupal UX team has been working on for Drupal 8. So let me start by, oh, it's a bit dark. Well, let me start by introducing myself. I'm a freelance user experience designer. I usually work on designing or researching interactions around applications. And I'm also in my last year of interaction design at the Utrecht School of Art. And my thesis is focused around building haptic interactions. So that's mostly just playing around with electronics and building stuff. But apart from that, I am the Drupal 8 UX maintainer, which means, well, I'm partly responsible for getting new UX improvements into Drupal Core. So how did I learn about Drupal? It was for me a bit of a crash course. Most of my involvement in Drupal has been during the Drupal 7 UX project. Not sure if all of you have heard of it, but what we did is we really radically tried to improve the user experience of Drupal. And for most of the developers in the community, it was a bit of a crash course in UX, kind of like what it could do and what the process is like. And for a lot of designers like me, it was a really harsh lesson in how to do design in open source. So this is really a period where I was up all night working on all of the improvements that you now have in Drupal 7. From the 7 theme, the toolbar, the reorganization of the menu items, kind of all of those stuff. So during this Drupal 7 UX project, we learned a bit about the process that we have in open source and how we can apply design process to that as well. We think there's a lot of overlap in that process, and much of it is really about how we communicate our designs to the larger community. So rather than kind of putting up a cooking show where we just show our designs, we try to actively involve everyone in the community in our actual design work. And really try to make the developers part of every single step here, from research to concept prototyping to design and implementation. We learned that that's really the best way to get all of these improvements into core. And we found that being in those same channels as developers, being on IRC, being in IssueQ really helped getting kind of our point across when it comes to how people should treat UX far better. So let's talk about Drupal 8. I think one of the biggest mistakes we made in Drupal 7 is that we really only focused on the content creator. And we kind of left out a lot of people that are in this room today, site builders who use Drupal 8 just for building sites. And we haven't really done a lot of work around that area. Blocks are still the same, menus are still the same, and even the module page is still the same. And they're all not really usable, let's say that. And if you look at kind of our competition in this field, we're really starting to lag behind. If you look at something like Squarespace, we're not even near when it comes to the level of UX that they have for site building. And this is not really something that Contrib has been solving. It's starting to do it more so now, but it's still up in the air in most cases. So the question is really, what could be for the UX of Drupal 8? With just 6 months to go for the deadline that was initially set, we think it's going to be these 3 major topics that we're going to focus on in terms of improving the UX for Drupal 8. And we're pretty excited about these topics because we think we can really do a lot of work in improving them. So I want to kind of go through these 3 topics and kind of show you the work that we've been doing and the results of that. So let me start with content creation. It's not an official initiative, but it's one of the things that we learned was something everyone has trouble with. When you look at your clients, they all tend to struggle with this particular screen, or they tend to say it's just plain ugly, and it is. So that's what we worked on. And we initially did a usability study. We've been doing usability studies for the last 4 years. It's basically where we put a user in front of Drupal and ask them to do a series of tasks. And we found that there's a few large issues, and there's a whole lot of smaller issues. But we found out we couldn't really solve this just iteratively changing small things. We really needed to do a kind of a complete redesign. So a few of the issues we found is for example, a prominent one is the publishing state. It's not really clear to users whether it's published or not. And when you have it on your front end, you see it being, I think it's like somewhat pink-ish. And that's like the indicator that it's not published. Well, no one knows what that is. Whenever we ask, what's that pink, they just make something up. So it wasn't really clear that an article is published. And the vertical tabs at the bottom that we introduced in Drupal 7, we thought it was a really good pattern. It turns out that when contrib modules start adding their stuff there, it becomes a pretty bloated area. There's a lot of settings in there that's like on-off settings. And people really couldn't figure out which of the vertical tabs are important that they should be looking at and which were just on and off settings that they wouldn't really care about. Another thing that we found was the way that we kind of are able to group a lot of fields. In core, there's only like, I think, 2 ways to group fields. You can either do a field set or a vertical tab. So we found that's probably not enough. When you have a lot of complex forms, it's not enough to just group it with those 2 mechanisms. So this is a contrib module that adds, I think, horizontal tabs. And the last thing is previewing. This is, a pretty what the fuck, I would say. Because when you click preview, you get the preview in your administrative team, and you get like 2 different views. To people, this wasn't clear at all. They were expecting preview to go to the front end and actually show their content in their site, which I guess makes sense. Everyone would expect that. So that's what we did. We looked at the issues, we identified those as the main issues for solving in a redesign, and then we started to look at what are other kind of systems doing in this space. And when we talk about content creation screen, everyone always goes, let's do it like WordPress. And this is where most of the analysis kind of ends. So we thought, let's look further. Let's look at other CMSs, how they do it. So we looked at, I think, about 15 different CMSs. And we did kind of a quick review. We looked at CMSs like WordPress, Joomla, Text Pattern, Movable Type, Hippo, a lot of different CMSs, proprietary ones and open source ones. And we noticed that actually they suffer from the same kind of problems. When you look at their content creation screens, they're quite often quite messy. Visually, there's always kind of different elements, and a lot of the systems have like the WYSIWYG editor just straight put in there, and it doesn't match with their other visual styling, causing kind of a distraction. But still, in comparison to Drupal, they often have much more consistent visual styling and visual hierarchy than we do. From like really over-the-top styling like Joomla has, to very minimalistic styling like Text Pattern has. So we went with that information and we looked at how can we improve Drupal. We did some brainstorming. We worked a lot with Jared Punch, who's from Lullabot. Just kind of brainstorming ideas, what could we do to improve the content creation page. And we brought all our notes together after 3 weeks and started to really look at what are the trends that we see that we want to improve. And it was largely in kind of improving the grouping of form elements. It's now all like linear in one, or vertically linear in the page. And if you look at Drupal now, there's content on top, just your fields on top. There's settings below that in the vertical tabs, and then there's the actions at the bottom. And it's pretty common for the vertical tabs to be visually the most prominent thing on the page. So what we did is we looked at what are other configurations that we can use. Could we put the actions at the top? Could we put the actions in the sidebar? or could we, put actions at the bottom, put settings in the side. And we found that for core, the most favorable pattern would be to put the settings in the side, because that's one of the patterns we felt was going to work across most of our administrative pages if we wanted to. So this is the current design that's now being implemented in Drupal core. It includes a sidebar, which has on the top the kind of the publishing information, the most important information for people, and then in an accordion all of the settings that were previously in vertical tabs. So this is really it. This is going in. We've tested it, and I want to quickly go over some of the more detailed design iterations that we did. This is, for example, the top of the sidebar. Well, you can see this is where we started with, and that's where we ended up with. Is we started with just a very complex design, with a lot of bells and whistles, and as we moved closer to the last iteration, we took out a lot of stuff. We thought about including taxonomy, and then we said, let's not do that. It's probably not gonna scale very well. And we concluded from our initial testing that we should put more emphasis on the publishing state. So that's what we did. And obviously one of the major challenges still is the vertical tabs, whether they can account for all of the settings that some modules have. But we found most modules have like 1 or 2 settings. So the pattern itself is going to work. We iterated on a couple of other stuff as well. We played around, for example, with the button placement. I mean, that's the most common feedback we got. I want my buttons somewhere else. I want them on the side, at the bottom, floating around. So we tried a lot of iterations on that. One of the interesting ones is the one where we place it in the top, kind of in the shortcut bar, because this was a pattern we could potentially use across core. But in the end, we concluded that those are interesting explorations, but maybe better for Contrib to do, because the pattern itself wouldn't, or at least would be hard to be very consistent across core. So we finished all of these design iterations, and we went to validate our concept. Is it something that people freak out about and go like, oh my god, this is a complete horror, it doesn't work for me? Or is it something that they feel happy about? And we tested about 12 users, both experienced and beginner users, so content creators and site builders. And they were pretty happy. They were very positive about the publishing state, that it was really out there. And they liked that you had all of your your content stuff on the left, and all of the settings and all of the things you only have to care about maybe at the end, on the right. So they really liked that kind of distinction. But they obviously also found a lot of issues. See if we can go back really quick. Well, here you can see the menu settings, for example. Right now, that's pretty difficult. There's like a checkbox, and then you kind of have to know which menu to put it in, because you don't know where it's actually going to show up. There's no preview or anything like that. So we found a lot of issues with the actual settings. One of the odd things is the publishing date. When you change that, you have to be really on key and do it perfectly like it's described in the description. Otherwise, you get an error. So a few people changed that, and they all got the error. It was pretty hard to do. So there's a lot of smaller optimizations we can do to make this better. But in the end, we're now in this stage where we say we're going to jump to actual implementation. And there's a core issue. It's that one. I think it's implement the great content creation screen. And we need a lot of developer help to make this happen. Sure. The buttons are at the bottom. So that's the pattern that we decided on. That's the right one to do for now. I think Contrib is definitely going to do more in different positions. All right, so let me go to the next topic, mobile. Mobile has really been a large movement lately, and we've been trying to make Drupal 8 mobile friendly, both for site visitors and administrators. And I think a lot of people in this room as well, you can see the urgency for us to really be ahead in the mobile space and really make it an essential part of Drupal. I don't think I really need to bore you with the details, but I think Luke Robluski gave a presentation at the last DrupalCon, kind of about the numbers as well. Mobiles will overtake PCs as the most dominant web access device in 2013. It has seen, I think, 600% growth or something like that in 2010. And I think in Drupal, the community has really noticed this trend, and we're starting to work on it. I think a lot of our clients will, in the next 2 years or something, start asking for their site to be mobile accessible, or maybe even already for a few of them. But also, we want to support administrators. We want to support content creators, for example, journalists who want to microblog while they're at events, or site builders who want to be able to flush cache, when they're at the toilet. But looking at that, we saw there's a lot of stuff we can do. There's a lot of stuff the UX team can focus on making the mobile experience better. And so there's a couple initiatives, and they're all focused on kind of different parts of that mobile experience. There's, I think, Whiskey, which is the services initiative, and they're trying to do stuff that you can build an app and so on mobile, or at least the APIs are accessible. But we really try to focus on the ability to use Drupal administrative forms in mobile devices. Basically be able to navigate your admin area and be able to do stuff there. And our focus is really on making that as great as possible. But to do this, we need to kind of design the complete stack of mobile interactions that you can have, like form definitions, the toolbar, primary and secondary task, and the 7 team, like really the whole complete stack, because you have to be able to get everywhere. So in terms of where we are in that process, we're now in the concept and prototyping. We've done our kind of our research, and we're now just trying out a lot of different stuff. So in the research, for example, we looked again kind of what's the current state. Well, Drupal core can't do anything, basically. It sucks at being mobile right now. But there are a lot of stuff in the contrib space that can do something around this. I think there's over a dozen modules that can allow you to detect the screen size or the screen resolution and integrate, for example, with iPhone or Android apps. But there's also a whole bunch of themes that are now being responsive, or maybe even a fine-tuned experience for mobile. And I think one of the most promising ones out of all of these was Drupal, which focuses kind of on the administrative part. And I think it's an iOS app that basically allows you to log into your website, your Drupal website. And it's primarily focused on the content creation. Kind of the tasks about site building, like placing your blocks. I think you can do it, but it's not like really optimized for that. So I think it's a good first step at what this could be like. But I felt like using it, there's much more that we can do to really make it good, especially for more of the site building tasks. So again, we kind of looked at, we know what Drupal can do, not that much, mostly in the contrib space. Then we started looking around, what do other systems do? And to be honest, I was a bit surprised. There's not really a lot of CMSs that do this well. There's only really a few UX or CMSs that actually provide a somewhat tailored mobile UX experience. So we looked at, for example, WordPress. They have apps tailored for each platform, so iOS, Android, Windows, BlackBerry. And they also had one for the HP WebOS, which I think is kind of a dead platform right now. But anyways, it was a pretty beautiful one. I really liked it. It kind of focused on the heart of the WordPress experience, which is just putting up pages and kind of moderating the content and some comments. But it was really beautiful in the details. It was really nice. how you could quickly edit a comment or quickly add a post. I felt like it's really like these detailed interactions that make an app good. I mean, the standard elements are relatively the same across most. We looked at another, which is Squarespace. Squarespace has a really focused experience, again, around just content creation. I don't think you can actually even do anything else. But it's also pretty unique because as opposed to a lot of other apps that try to follow the style guide of iOS or Android, they really try to bring their own style that they had on the desktop to the mobile version. And I really liked it. There were a lot of qualities in there that we could do as well in Drupal core. Again, I don't think we should only be looking at CMSs because, well, they're just not good right now. But we should probably be looking at applications and apps. Gmail is one of those. This is, for example, a pattern that you can now see in a lot of different tablet designs, where you have the sidebar on the left that you use to navigate through the content on your right. So what's the current proposal? What are we working on right now? It's this. I decided not to do a demo and just give you the URL because I think this is something you just have to try for yourself. It's not a mobile app. It's just making our current administrative interface responsive for all different screen sizes. And it's still a bit of a rough prototype, but in terms of focus, it's right now primarily focused on just navigating around and getting to the actual pages. We haven't really iterated much on the actual blogs pages or create content page. But it's getting there slowly. So there's obviously a lot of different things that we have to consider. One of the fun ones, for example, is drag and drop. How do you make that work on your mobile phone? Especially when you have to drag a block from the top of your page to the bottom of your page, when you're moving something from the header to the footer. That's not necessarily that easy. There's a couple different patterns that we can use. We can use the pattern where you basically tap on the item, then it's selected, you scroll down the page, and then you drop it again. There's another pattern where you use both of your fingers, so you select it and then you scroll with your other finger. But there's also, for example, a pattern where you select it, you go to the bottom of your screen, and then it auto-scrolls with you. I think iOS and Android use that now as well in their the places where you can drag and drop in that interface. So that's maybe one that we want to pursue, because obviously we want to allow you to on your bike or whatever, when you only have one hand available. So again, clearly a lot of different patterns that we can use for just this interaction. And we hope through prototyping and user testing we can find the one that really works for our end users. Another thing is navigation. One of the difficult things is, for example, on the content listing, so admin/content. The question is, should we mimic the desktop experience? We figured out probably not entirely, because something like filters is going to take up half of your screen when you're on your mobile phone, and then you also have bulk actions that you can do and a lot of stuff. So we figured, that's, for example, stuff that we should probably progressively disclose as you want it. So maybe it should be hidden behind an icon on the top left, or top right, sorry. An example of that is, for example, the action, which is the plus icon. I'm not sure if you can see that. So the plus icon, if you click on that, it takes you to the add content screen. So again, this is kind of small optimizations that we try to do to make it really easy to just get to the list of pages. But also something like search is probably even more important on mobile, because, well, navigating through a large part of your administrative interface is not that easy, sadly. But I think the challenge in terms of us moving forward is finding patterns that scale to everything in Drupal core. when you have added those 30 modules and you're trying to use views on your mobile phone, do we have patterns that can accommodate for that? Not right now, maybe not ever, but we're trying to go at least as far as possible in terms of supporting kind of our ecosystem of concept modules and making sure that they can work on mobile phones. That's not all. It's all developing. As we're implementing new stuff hits us. We can leverage far more than just multi-touch, for example. I think browsers are now starting to, for example, allow you to use your camera. So it allows you to use something like if you're at an event and you're recording, you can straight up put that into your Drupal site. Would be really nice if we could support something like that. But those are all developments that are happening right now. So it might be that something like location detection, for example, could be implemented in a couple months if that becomes available. So that's really all for mobile. Where can you contribute? We have this group, and I think there's a tag in the issue queue, which is mobile, and we have weekly meetings on mobile, and we are working really hard on prototypes, but as a lot of stuff in Drupal core, we don't have enough people. As much interest as there is in mobile, there's really not a lot of people working on it. I think there's like, at the time, maybe 3 or 4 people are really working on it hard. So we need graphic designers to come up with designs, and we need interaction designers to think with us in terms of how each of the models are going to work. So if you can, please help out. And let me move to the next topic, which is quite a big one. The Blocks and Layout Initiative, is anyone familiar with that, or some? Okay. So it's focused around basically putting significant parts of panels into core, and basically allowing the drag and drop of blocks on the front end, and maybe allowing you to create different layouts for a given page, and doing that in core, which is, well, pretty hard to do. So we've been thinking about this particular topic for, I think, over a year now, and I'm pretty excited about what we can do already, because this is kind of a fundamental part of Drupal, moving blocks around, that we have kind of left neglected. We haven't really changed it at all, I think, since like Drupal 5 or whatever. Well, except for the drag and drop, that's not possible. That was, I think, the last improvement for blocks. So we can do some really cool stuff if we do it really well, because obviously this has to work for all different use cases. So we're now in the research phase for this. And if we look at, just like we did for the other 2 topics, we looked at the current state. We've done a lot of usability tests on this, and we concluded in one word, it sucks. People can't really use it that well, especially when you have, say, more than the blocks provided by core. It becomes a really messy page. There's like 50, 60 blocks on it, and just putting something to the top of the page is really troublesome. So the current state is you have blocks, and you place them in one layout, which is applied on every single page, and you can configure the blocks individually to maybe not show up on a certain page. So that's about the flexibility that Drupal core gives you, and we know this is outdated. There's plenty of modules in the concept space that show that we need to improve this. So, that's good. So what we've worked on is basically figuring out how do we close this gap. Oh, that's really small. So there's basically the front end, and then there's the back end where you configure where your blocks are. And those 2 don't really match. When people move stuff around blocks, move them around on the administrative page, they tend to say to us, like, I'm not sure where this is going to be on my page. When there's something like the header, it's clear. But when there's, like, I think in Bartik, there's like areas that are called like triptych, something like that. people have no clue where it's going to show up. So that's kind of the gap that we need to close from the administrative area to the actual front end. And in the test that we did a test in Minnesota in 2011, I think around this time. And we found that people have a really hard time kind of grasping how Drupal works. And they kind of like, when we think about Drupal, we think about it being, you know, my front page, it's a view. There's like a block here, there's a node here, there's a menu there, and there's like a custom block there. But when a normal person, not a Drupal person, thinks about a site, they think about, oh, this is content, looks different, this is a content, this is content, this is content, ah, that's my menu. That's about all the separation that they conceptually make. So when we throw Drupal at them and we say, well, for this view, you got to go to this interface. For this block, you got to go to this other interface. Now for your node, you have to go to this interface. They're just lost. And they have to learn like, you know, 4 or 5 different concepts to place that one block on their front page. So if you looked at all of those modules and kind of all of the configuration and all of the stuff that they provide, it's getting crazy. It's going to be really hard, even in the future, for people to do this. So we need to start looking at going to a more unified model. So again, we did what we did for the other ones. We looked at our competition, because we're not the only ones trying to solve this problem. And we looked at systems like Squarespace, which has really kind of built much of their reputation and their experience around being able to do this. And you can basically just go to a blank page, pick the kind of item, the kind of block that you want on there, and just drag it in. That's it. It's a really simple process, and they allow you to just drop in any block and actually customize the way that they're configured as well in terms of layout. So this is really fancy. Then there's obviously Enterprise. CQ5, which is I think a Adobe tool right now. It's a CMS, and it allows you to basically get the ordinary content creators. They can just pick the block they want, and again, just drag it onto the page. For them, really simple, and it's actually interesting because they scaled this pattern to other kinds of layouts as well. So whenever you're building a newsletter, which obviously is very common in enterprise, or when you're building maybe even a mobile website, you can just drag in your blocks, and that's how it works. So that's really interesting that they were able to do that. WordPress doesn't really have this in its base install, but there's a couple of plugins that do it. This is PageLines, which is, I think it costs like $200. But it does allow you to create that custom page and move stuff into the layout. And it's actually pretty nifty. You can do something like templates, and you can do stuff like responsive WordPress templates as well. But yeah, it's pretty expensive. This is way too dark. Anyways, it's all empty, because the current state in Drupal is empty. We have nothing to really do this. We have the blocks, but we have nothing like a drag and drop builder. Dashboard maybe, but that's going out of core, so we have nothing, basically. And our competition is far ahead of us. They've established models that work, and they have built a lot of tools around this model. If you look at Squarespace, it really works because they have this one tool where they can do all of that. But what do most of them suck at? Dynamic. When you're thinking anything more dynamic than a static landing page, they tend to suck. They just don't have good patterns for that. So that's probably because it's really difficult, and that's what we found. But when you're, for example, building a layout and you're building a page and you want the layout to be different on the French versus the English version, or maybe you want to show a different image when you're viewing the French version of that node versus the English version of that node. There's a lot of kind of dynamic configurations that you can apply to a given page. And that's something they obviously do poorly. So I think this could be a really radical change if this actually makes it into core. It's kind of like CCK in core. It's a radical change, breaks a lot of new patterns, and we really have to take our time and stress test it to see how this might work. So people obviously ask, why don't we just put panels into core? We think it's not to the level of usability that we want for something in core. Like it's improving a lot, especially in the last 6 months, but it's not really there yet. There's a few large conceptual problems that panels is just not solving. And we could try to iterate on it, but we found let's just start from a clean slate and really look at what's the ideal user experience for something like this. And our proposal, and please keep in mind it's still a work in progress, but we concluded there are kind of 3 major parts to designing this. There's the page library, basically all of your pages on your Drupal site. There's the component library, which is basically all of the blocks on your site, and they all come together in this kind of drag and drop builder where you kind of are building the actual page. So those are kind of the different parts that we see. And there's a good quote from Merlin, but if you just created a component and put it into a library, and then over here, where you're generating a page layout, you can add that view to your page as a component. If everything worked this way, the perceived complexity would diminish. And that's a lot. But in basically it means that if we have one model for both panels, blocks, menus, for placing all of those items on your site, then the actual complexity around that would diminish a whole lot compared to everyone building their own kind of solution to this large problem. So this is kind of where core comes in, right? So to illustrate that, this would be, for example, this is just an example, but this could be the component library or basically the blocks library, where it would list all of the blocks in your system. You could edit them just from that place. But there's also the page library. And I think this is actually a concept that's not in core at all, or in Contrib even, where you can actually see all of the pages on your site. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least I don't think there is. And it would allow you to, for example, when you enabled the contact module, you would be able to actually find it rather than having to guess that there is a contact module and that it exposes a menu link somewhere in the navigation module and it wasn't disabled or something like that. So again, one place where you can go to just find all your pages and search for them. And goes from static pages like your front page to very dynamic pages, like for example, content/percentage articles, where the articles is a node ID. And that dynamic is, well, that's really the hard part. That's the part where we're struggling with when it comes to design. But also, just click add new page, and you could potentially follow this kind of workflow, where you start with creating the page, you pick a layout, and then when you say you want something like a node ID, you have to specify where that is in the URL. So that's the choose context parts. And then you're basically there. Then you are in the part where you are able to drag in and drop blocks. And if needed, you have to configure those blocks. So this could be a potentially really easy workflow, but when you're building really dynamic pages, it's definitely more difficult. So this is an example how this could actually end up looking. Keep in mind again, it's very rough, but you could just have like a pane where you could drag and drop your blocks from, or a sidebar where you can drag and drop your blocks from, or a hovering box where you could drag and drop your blocks from, or actually from the contextual links where you could just add a block. So there's a whole lot of different patterns, and we've been really prototyping on what the flow could be like. And there's a prototype, and this is the URL. Because again, this is kind of the same like mobile. It's a flow, so you really have to try and play with it to understand whether it works for you or not. And I think I finished it last night, so if you have any feedback, just come up to me and tell me about it. Well, then there's the question, where can you contribute? This initiative is really big. As I said, it's kind of as radical as CCK. And yes, there you go. It's quite big, and the drag and drop editor, that's really sexy and cool to work on, but there's a lot of different parts to it. Just creating a page, adding a block. There's a whole lot of different stuff that you can do and can help us work on. Because making a page and building a layout, I think just in this room, there's probably going to be thousands of different use cases as you're using it. So we have to kind of account for at least a couple thousand of them. At least the 80% that we have to account for in terms of core. So we're going to need help on the graphic design part. We pretty much have almost no graphic designers working on Drupal core. So if you know anyone or you are a graphic designer, please come up. And they will probably make us help make it more usable and more beautiful. We need researchers because, as I was saying, this is a vast subject. So just in terms of all of the interaction design and all of the user testing that we have to do, it's going to be pretty complex. And in the end, there's also the developers who we obviously need to make this happen. And because I have some time left, I can probably show it to you, which is always a good idea to demo it. Let's see. Here we go. Oh, there's a cable. Oh, that's better. That's all. Well. Oh, there we go. Oh, well, let's start with questions, and I can show it as soon as it's up. Sure.
When you showed the possible workflow of adding a page and layout for that page and components as the wording is now, and at the last step content, are these at the moment and in the end separate steps? Because maybe it makes the thing too complicated. Maybe components and content can be added in one step, because well, as we said in the session earlier this morning, many editors in our experience don't think of, okay, now I go to a step where I add components and now I go to a step where I add content. They just want to lay out their page, and now they are thinking, I need some listing here, and then and now I've got to type in some text here. So
no, so in the actual prototype, which I guess I can show now, the workflow is not that you select your components and then place them on the page. It's basically like you get your page and then you can add components to it or blocks.
And content in one.
Well, yeah, and content. I mean, content is just a block, basically, but then where you fill out the node ID or the context that you want to use for it.
Can you put other like nodes in some teaser mode or some view mode onto that page too?
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be a block. So if that block has different view modes, you can just select which view mode you want to display.
So I can add to my page, to my new page, I can add the teaser view mode of node 3, and it's in the bottom region of the page or something. Okay, cool.
I mean, it's just configuration of the block, right? It's all about finding that actual block. That's generally going to be the difficulty. All right, in the back.
So I'm wondering, actually, there is some context configuration happening when creating the page, and does there also happen context configuration while adding content to the page?
Right, so there's only configuration for the context when you need to build a dynamic page. When you're building something static, well, like the front page, you don't need it. But when you're building something like node/percentage, where that percentage is the node ID, you need to configure what that percentage is. So there's going to be configuration when you require dynamic pages. On the actual block, it's going to default. So it's going to default to the context that's available. So for example, when you're placing a node body and there's a node ID available from the URL, it's going to say, oh, let's just pick that one as default. Obviously, you can change that if you want. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, there's, for example, global context, and I can derive from, like, for example, the global site information or the user that's logged in right now. I can derive a group from the user and stuff like this.
Yeah,
I'm curious about.
Yeah, that's a global configuration that's available. So whenever you place in a block that uses or at least requires context of that type. So for example, user, then it's just going to grab the first one available. And if there's none available, then it's going to trigger you to go through the process of adding that context to your page.
Is there a concept for like the separation of like fixed blocks or fixed elements that are always staying there on these pages, because you want to always have something in the header or so, and like I think Panels now has this locking mechanism which you can make something maybe sticky, to overstress another word.
Yeah. Yes, that's a really complex area. But we're expecting there to be something like side elements. And those side elements are kind of blocks that you would group. And that's like a group you would pull in. We're not yet like really convinced that there's well, a lot of different models that we can use that are not going to be, well, let's say it's very difficult. Because just being able to overwrite, like for example, on my front page, I don't want to show the site name, or I want to show it differently. Then there has to be some kind of pattern for overriding group block configuration. So we're not really out there on what we should do, but we are expecting it to be something like grouping blocks and being able to drag those into your page. And it's likely, I think, when you're building a page, for example, that we're going to do some defaults as well, where we say the header is probably almost always going to be filled with the header group block. And whenever you want to override it, you obviously can. Does that answer it? Yeah, so we're working on it. Let's say that.
This should be the last question.
Well, you have answered my question, but it's the last question, so I will make another question. About the superadmin menu, that probably for me and many others developers is really important to accessing to different part of the Drupal administrator. Do you think something about the full integration in Drupal 8?
So you mean full integration of all of these concepts, or what? That's sorry, head. I don't know. It's right now we're not necessarily working on that, so it might happen, but I don't think anyone is working on it right now. So I don't know. I don't think so, at least. Let's say that. Yeah. All right. That was all. Okay. Thank you.